So if you were reading or watching the news in the fall of 2014, you knew that Michael Brown was shot dead by a white policeman in Ferguson, Missouri on August 9th, and that Michael Brown was an unarmed black teenager. And you knew that the mistrust between the African American community and the police erupted into violence. But you might not have known that 4 days after Michael Brown was shot, a headline in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch read, "Volunteers clean up Ferguson after protests and looting." So one of these volunteers was an auto mechanic, and his name was Gary Park. And he was sweeping up rubber bullets, broken glass, liquor bottles, and tear gas grenades. And he said to the reporter, "I needed to come out today just to get some stability. I wanted some encouragement." If you were following the news in fall of 2014, you also may remember that on November 24th, a grand jury in Missouri decided not to pursue charges against the policemen who killed Michael Brown. The next day, a headline in the Huffington Post read, "You heard about the lootings in Ferguson. Here are the people cleaning up the mess." One of those people cleaning up the mess was 66-year-old Maria Flores, whose El Palenque restaurant was damaged in the riots and the looting. And she told the reporter, "This is the Ferguson community. When something happens, everyone is there helping out each other." Was Ferguson a broken place, even a red zone when Michael Brown was shot, and on those nights afterwards when riots broke out? In this module, you'll learn about two types of broken places. The first is what we call slow burn zones, and they're places that decline over a period of time, like Rust Belt cities in the Midwestern and the Eastern U.S., where the industry has exited from the city and there's a long period of decline in the quality of life. And even though we focus largely on cities and civic ecology, we can have slow burn zones also in rural areas like the coal mining region of Pennsylvania, where the mining activities have contaminated the water, the rivers, the streams over a long period, so there's been a gradual decline in the quality of water in these streams. The second type of broken place is called sudden red zones. And these are places where there's been a disaster, like a hurricane, Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, or a conflict or a war, like in the former Yugoslavia. Civic ecology practices emerge in both types of places, and sometimes a slow burn zone can transform overnight into a disaster or a red zone. So for example, in New York City in the 1970s, you had what you would consider a slow burn zone. As businesses were abandoning the city, and sometimes government would really abandon whole neighborhoods, you had a lot of vacant lots, you had gang violence, you had blighted neighborhoods. And this was a period when a lot of community gardeners came out, and they started community gardens on these vacant and blighted properties. And then after 9/11, you had conflict, or what you might call a red zone, a sudden red zone, or sudden disaster or conflict. And again, people returned to these community gardens, and this time they were planting daffodils in memory of the people who had perished. So they were converting the community gardens into memorial gardens. Now, police-community relations likely had been declining for years in Ferguson, just as they have in other U.S. cities. But the sudden death of Michael Brown led to riots and burning. Overnight, Ferguson became a sudden red zone, a different kind of broken place. But given what we've seen so often in broken places, how civic ecology practices emerge in places where we might least expect people to come out and take charge, and even to green their neighborhoods, perhaps the fact that people came out to clean up after Michael Brown's death, and as they said, to find some stability, to get some encouragement, and even to demonstrate that Ferguson is a community where everyone is there helping each other, is not surprising.